I was halfway through installing solar panels on my barn roof when a silver SUV skidded up my graveled driveway like it owned the place. Out stepped a woman in a leopard print blouse, clipboard in hand, and an expression like she just smelled something foul. I didn't even get a chance to say hello before she barked. "You didn't file for HOA solar modification approval." I blinked. "Excuse me?" She held up the clipboard like it was the Ten Commandments. "Your project violates subsection 12C of the Greenview Estates Homeowners Association Energy Compliance Act. All solar installations must be approved by the board." I stared at her. "Greenview Estates is 3 miles down the road. This land's been in my family since 1954. I'm not part of any HOA." She scoffed. "Well, the map says otherwise." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Ma'am, I've got a deed, a county survey, and 0 obligations to any HOA. This isn't your jurisdiction." She didn't even flinch. "I'm Karen Holloway, HOA president. And everything within visual range of our community must comply with our standards. This solar setup is unsightly." And just like that, I knew what kind of war I was about to be dragged into. See, I'm not a troublemaker. I live on 10 acres of quiet land in rural Arizona. I grow produce, raise goats, fix tractors, and keep to myself. But the minute you tell someone like Karen, "No," they don't back off. They double down. Later that afternoon, I found a warning notice duct taped to my mailbox. "Unauthorized construction. Cease immediately or face fines." No signature. Just the Greenview HOA logo. Funny thing is, I don't even receive their newsletters. The next morning, I came out to find one of my goats chewing on a rolled-up letter slipped through my barn door. Second and final notice. It read, "Failure to comply will result in legal consequences and potential referral to law enforcement." That's when I knew this wasn't just some nosy neighbor with control issues. This was an HOA president on a mission, and apparently, she thought my land was her territory. She was about to find out just how wrong she was. I didn't respond to the second notice. Instead, I walked it straight to the wood stove and watched it curl into smoke. That should have been the end of it. But people like Karen don't go away just because you ignore them, they escalate. 3 days later, I was loading hay bales into the back of my pickup when I noticed a line of vehicles idling by my property gate. 4 cars, hazard lights blinking. At first, I thought someone had broken down, but as I approached, I spotted a sea of polos, clipboards, and self-importance. Karen was back. And she'd brought company. "We're here to perform a visual compliance inspection," she announced like I was supposed to be honored. "There have been multiple complaints from Greenview Estates residents about the visual impact of your property." "My property?" I repeated. "This isn't Greenview Estates." She waved that off like it was a technicality. "If it can be seen from within the HOA, it affects property values. Your barn is visible from the west-facing homes on Meadowlark Lane. That makes it our business." Standing next to her was a man with a tape measure, already sizing up the width of my driveway. Another woman was snapping photos of my barn like she was gathering evidence for a murder trial. One of them even pointed at my rusted old tractor and muttered, "Non-compliant aesthetic. You all need to leave," I said, voice steady but sharp. "This land isn't under your HOA. You have no right to be here." Karen raised her chin like a queen about to pronounce judgment. "As HOA president, I can report violations that impact our neighborhood. If you refuse to comply, we'll be forced to take further action." "Try me," I said. That night, I installed a new trail cam facing the front gate and reinforced the "Private property, no trespassing" signs along the fence line. The next morning, I found one of the signs ripped off and tossed in the dirt. Petty. Predictable. But it told me everything I needed to know. Karen wasn't just pushing HOA policy. This was personal. 2 days later, a sheriff's cruiser pulled up while I was changing the oil on my tractor. "Morning," the deputy said, tipping his hat. "Got a report of unpermitted construction and illegal fencing." I sighed and walked him through the paperwork: deed, survey, county permits, everything stamped and filed. He flipped through it, frowned, and then gave a low whistle. "This is rock solid. They really called this in?" I nodded. "They think I'm part of their HOA." He scratched his head. "Well, you're not. And even if you were, this isn't how enforcement works. This feels off." "Welcome to my life," I said. He apologized, took a few notes for his report, and left. Less than a week later, another officer came by for noise complaints about my goats. Then, suspicion of illegal dumping when I burned some brush on a designated pile. Every time, I showed my papers. Every time, the officers left annoyed, with Karen, not me. But the visits kept coming. Karen had made it her personal mission to bury me in nuisance complaints. It got to the point where the county dispatcher started recognizing my name. "This again?" one officer muttered during his third visit. "You need to lawyer up or something." I was already thinking the same thing. See, I hadn't done anything wrong. I wasn't breaking any laws. But Karen was betting I'd get tired, worn down, or intimidated enough to bend to her will. She wanted me to tear down my barn, stop the solar project, and make my property disappear from her precious HOA's sideline. Too bad for her. I don't bend easy. What she didn't realize was that while she was playing neighborhood tyrant, I was keeping records. Every visit. Every complaint. Every video clip. I wasn't just going to push back. I was going to push back hard. She wanted a fight? She was about to get one. By week 3, I had law enforcement on a first-name basis. Deputy Haskins showed up again, his 4th visit. This time, the complaint was about a potentially dangerous structure that could fall over and harm children walking by. He pointed to the goat feeder. "You're kidding," I said, wiping sweat from my brow. "Nope." He looked genuinely embarrassed. "Apparently, someone filed a report saying this thing was improperly anchored. It's sitting on cinder blocks. 4 goats." He sighed. "I know, man. I'm just here 'cause I gotta be." At this point, I wasn't even mad. I was documenting everything like clockwork: recordings, body cam audio, with officer permission, and even photos of every citation, bogus or not. I'd created a whole digital folder labeled HOA Nonsense. It was already 3 gigabytes and growing. The petty parade continued. 2 days later. "Your barn lighting is a nuisance to Greenview residents trying to sleep. I use solar string lights to keep predators away from my goats at night." 3 days after that. "Unlicensed vehicle on property." That was my 1952 Willys Jeep, fully restored, registered as an antique. The following week. Suspicious burning activities. I was burning tree limbs after a thunderstorm blew through. I'd pulled the county permit before I lit the first match. And still, they came. Each time, the officers, by now rotating through the entire department, left shaking their heads. Some even apologized for having to respond. One of them, Officer Morales, even said, "You know, we're keeping track of these too. This is bordering on harassment." "Bordering?" I said. "Feels like we crossed that line 10 complaints ago." The HOA meetings went public, and ugly. Then came the town hall. I don't attend HOA meetings, why would I? I'm not a member. But one of my friends who lives in Greenview slipped me a recording of the most recent session. Karen stood at the front like she was hosting a TED Talk on tyranny. "We are dealing with a hostile actor," she said, pointing to a blown-up aerial map of the neighborhood with my property circled in red ink. "This individual has repeatedly flaunted regulations, refuses to cooperate, and is lowering our property values." Someone in the back asked, "But isn't his land outside the HOA?" Karen's reply, "That's a technicality. His structures are visible. His behavior affects our neighborhood spirit." That was when it clicked. This wasn't about violations. It wasn't about solar panels or goats or string lights. This was about control. They tried physical intimidation. The next escalation wasn't a clipboard or a call to the sheriff. It was a fence. I woke up to find a line of Greenview HOA branded fencing installed along my southern property line, right through part of my pasture. No warning. No letter. Nothing. A bold red sign was zip-tied to the middle post. Greenview HOA buffer zone, no unauthorized activity beyond this point. I stared at it for a full minute, blinking in disbelief. They'd literally invaded my land. I stormed into the house, grabbed my survey documents and property stakes, and returned to the pasture. The fence was a full 12 feet inside my boundary line. Real quick, if you think Karen crossed the line with that fence, just hit the like button so we know you're still with us. I took photos. Video. Then I called the county. A week later, a land surveyor came out, confirmed the trespass, and issued a formal notice of violation against the HOA. Karen still didn't back down. She claimed it was an honest mistake. Right. Just like all the other mistakes. Caught on camera. Then came the moment that tipped everything over the edge. One night, I was reviewing footage from my trail cam, the one aimed at the gate, when I saw a figure approaching the barn under moonlight. It was Karen. Wearing a hoodie, clutching a flashlight, she walked right up to the barn and started taking pictures. At one point, she held up a tape measure and attempted to measure the height of my flagpole. She was on my land at midnight. I called the sheriff the next morning. This time, they didn't just take notes. They launched an official investigation for criminal trespass. That gave me the opening I needed. It was time to stop playing defense. Karen had crossed the line from annoying into unlawful. The cops were getting frustrated. I was beyond exhausted. And the HOA? They were getting bolder with each week. The midnight trespassing was the final straw. I sat at the kitchen table the next morning with a pot of black coffee and a legal pad. I wasn't just going to defend myself anymore. I was going on the offensive. Because if they wanted a war, I was going to bring one, with lawyers, documents, county officials, and every bit of leverage I had. The morning after I caught Karen trespassing, I woke up with a calm, focused anger. I wasn't going to knock on doors or shout at fences. No, I wanted to send a message that was firm, visible, and absolutely, undeniably legal. So I installed a flagpole. I'd been meaning to for a while anyway. The pole was aluminum, 20 feet tall, and anchored in a concrete base. It stood proudly beside the barn, overlooking the pasture. When I raised the American flag that afternoon, the cloth snapped crisply in the wind, bold and unapologetic. By dusk, I'd already gotten a phone call. It was Karen. "You can't just put that thing up without approval," she snapped, skipping any pleasantries. "Yes, I can," I said. "This is my land. I don't need your permission to fly the flag of my own country. It violates Section 8B of the HOA's Visual Uniformity Standards. I am not in your HOA. That's debatable." "No. It's not." I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. The next day, a letter appeared in my mailbox, unsigned, of course, accusing me of creating a political statement designed to provoke the community. There was nothing political about it. It was just a flag. But I knew what they meant. They didn't like that I was making a stand they couldn't control. And sure enough, it didn't end there. 2 days later, a sheriff's deputy pulled up again. Different face this time. Young guy. Looked like he hadn't been on the job more than a year. "Got a call about an unsafe flag installation," he said, already sounding unsure of himself. I showed him the base, the installation permit, the structural specs I'd followed. He nodded, checking the boxes on his form. "Honestly, this looks textbook," he admitted. "I don't know why they keep calling us out here." "Because they can't stand the fact that I'm not under their thumb," I said. He gave me a sympathetic smile. "You ever think about pressing charges? This is borderline harassment." I had. But I wasn't ready just yet. I still had one more card to play. A few days passed. No visits, no notes, no drive-bys. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd gotten tired. But then came the meeting. A neighbor who sympathized with me invited me to a Greenview HOA open session. I decided to go, not to argue, but to observe. Karen didn't know I was in the room until about halfway through. She was mid-sentence talking about unauthorized flag displays and how they created visual conflict with the community's aesthetic values. When she saw me sitting quietly in the back, her mouth clamped shut. I raised my hand. "Ma'am," I said calmly, "could you explain how my property, which is outside of Greenview Estates, falls under your jurisdiction?" She stammered something about sight lines and community cohesion. "So, if someone outside your neighborhood paints their barn blue, and a Greenview resident happens to see it while driving, that's an HOA violation?" Silence. Someone in the front row started chuckling. Others shifted uncomfortably. I continued. "You're spending association funds chasing someone who doesn't pay dues, who doesn't live in your boundaries, and who legally owes you nothing. How do you justify that to your members?" A man on the board finally spoke up. "Karen, is his property officially annexed into the HOA?" She hesitated. "We believe it should be." "But is it?" "No," she admitted. That was the moment the room turned. The meeting ended with some awkward clapping and a few mumbled apologies from board members who had probably never questioned Karen's crusade until that night. I walked out without another word. That evening, as I sat on my porch sipping coffee and watching the flag ripple in the wind, a patrol car pulled into my driveway. Again. I walked out with the paperwork already in my hand. "Let me guess," I said. "The flag again?" The officer didn't even get out of the car. He rolled down his window and smiled. "Actually," he said, "I'm just here to let you know the sheriff's office is opening a formal review. Your name came up one too many times in the complaint log, and we're starting to look into the source." I paused. "Karen?" He didn't say yes. But he didn't have to. That was the moment I knew the tide had turned. I'd been playing defense for weeks, blocking punches, dodging accusations, and cleaning up the messes Karen left behind. But now the system that she had tried to weaponize against me was starting to turn its attention toward her. And I was just getting started. The next morning I called my lawyer. His name was Ron Hughes, and he'd been helping ranchers and rural property owners fight back against overreaching HOAs for the better part of 15 years. I told him everything, every visit, every citation, every anonymous complaint that just happened to sound like Karen's voice over the phone. Ron listened patiently. He didn't laugh. He didn't sound surprised. He'd heard worse. "You've got a clear-cut harassment case," he said. "But let's start with something simple." 2 days later, I mailed a certified cease and desist letter to the Greenview Estates HOA. It was 5 pages long. Professionally written. Every sentence backed with legal code and references to county jurisdiction boundaries. In short, the letter laid out 3 things. My property was not part of the HOA, legally, geographically, or contractually. Continued contact, trespassing, or complaints against my lawful use of my land constituted harassment and abuse of process. Any further incidents would result in a formal civil suit for damages and injunctive relief. We sent copies to the HOA board, the county office, and, just for good measure, the sheriff's department. For the first time in over a month, things got quiet. No knock on the door. No cops in the driveway. No flyers, letters, or fence posts shoved through the gate. I almost didn't trust it. 3 weeks passed. The flag still flew. The goats still bleated. I even expanded the barn lighting a bit, just to make sure they were still watching. Nothing. Then a friend from the inside slipped me something, an email chain between HOA board members. Karen had been lobbying to change the Greenview bylaws, retroactively, to include adjacent influence zones. That would give them authority over properties near the neighborhood if they were visibly disruptive. It was nonsense. Totally unenforceable. But it told me one thing: she wasn't backing down. She was just regrouping. That's when I knew I couldn't rely on one letter. I needed backup from someone bigger. So I filed a formal complaint with the County Land Use and Zoning Office. I gave them everything. Dates. Copies of every police visit. A map of where they installed that illegal fence. The photo of Karen on my land at night with her flashlight and measuring tape. Even the video footage. It took 2 weeks, but the results were worth the wait. The county launched a formal investigation into Greenview Estates HOA for operating outside its charter. Turns out, they'd quietly annexed multiple parcels that didn't legally belong to them, some through vague language in community documents, others through sheer intimidation. My case cracked it open. The county issued a formal cease and desist against Greenview Estates for unauthorized enforcement actions. They fined the board for multiple violations, ranging from trespass to misuse of civil resources. A separate inquiry was launched into the board president's conduct. Karen. The next time I saw her, she wasn't stomping up my driveway or waving a clipboard. She was sitting in the passenger seat of her husband's car at a stop sign near the general store, sunglasses on, looking anywhere but at me. I tipped my hat. She didn't wave back. The story made it into the local paper. HOA overreach leads to county investigation. The headline read. It didn't name me, but anyone from Greenview, or anyone who'd driven past my barn lately, knew exactly who they were talking about. That afternoon, Ron called me again. They reached out, he said. The HOA's lawyer wants to settle. Settle what? I asked. I haven't filed suit. Not yet, Ron replied. But they're offering $5,000 as a goodwill gesture. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the phone. Tell them to add a zero, I said. And make sure the apology is in writing. A week later, I had a check for $50,000 in my mailbox and a signed statement admitting fault for the repeated false reports, boundary encroachments, and unwarranted actions against a private citizen. Karen Holloway resigned from her position on the board that same week. If you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare, or just love seeing justice served, comment the word finally down below. It should have felt like the end. And in some ways it was. The calls stopped. The visits ended. The police apologized. Several deputies even came by off-duty to shake my hand. You stuck it out, one of them said. Most folks would have just given in. But more than anything, I felt relief. Not just because I won, but because I never let them change me. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. I didn't stoop to their level. I fought with paperwork, cameras, county codes, and patience. They tried to intimidate me off my own land. But I knew where my boundaries were. And now, so do they. After everything, after the sheriff's visits, the trespassing, the bogus complaints, the HOA letters, the settlement, it finally got quiet. The kind of quiet I'd almost forgotten existed. The mornings returned to normal, coffee on the porch, goats grazing by the fence line, the flag flapping steadily in the wind like it had always belonged there. The silence wasn't just physical. It was a mental stillness. A kind of peace that only comes after you've stood your ground and refused to be bullied off it. A few neighbors from Greenview reached out, not the board members, of course, but regular folks. They apologized for not saying something sooner. They told me they admired how I handled things. One guy even brought me a pie. I appreciated it. But I hadn't fought for pie or praise. I fought for something simple, the right to live without someone trying to run my life from behind a clipboard. Karen never did return to her former glory. Last I heard, she and her husband had quietly sold their home and moved out of Greenview entirely. No big announcement. No farewell letter. Just gone. Can't say I missed her. The new HOA president sent me a letter too, not a complaint, not a demand. Just a short, polite message saying they understood my land was outside their jurisdiction and that they hoped we could coexist peacefully as neighbors. I didn't respond, but I didn't burn it either. That felt like enough. As for the $50,000? I didn't spend it all at once. I used part of it to build a new greenhouse and install better fencing. The rest? I donated a chunk to a local legal aid group that helps rural homeowners defend their land against overreach and illegal enforcement tactics. Figured someone else out there might be fighting their own version of Karen. Because the truth is, I wasn't special. This kind of thing happens more than most folks realize. A nosy HOA. A power-hungry neighbor. A community board that starts thinking they're the law instead of just a group of homeowners with matching mailboxes. The difference is, I had the time, the knowledge, and the patience to fight back, and I had the evidence. That part's key. I didn't scream and curse and threaten like they probably expected me to. I documented. I stayed calm. I stood my ground. And when it mattered most, I let the system work the way it's supposed to. It's easy to feel powerless when you're up against a group or a board with fancy titles and lots of rules. But rules don't mean anything if they don't apply to you, and bullies tend to crumble when you throw their own rulebook back at them. I never wanted a fight. I never wanted attention. But I'm glad it happened. Because now everyone around here knows one thing for sure. I'm not part of their HOA. I never was. And I never will be. So if you're watching this and you're dealing with your own version of Karen, remember this. Know your rights. Keep your paperwork. Document everything. Don't give them what they want by losing your temper. Just stand tall, stay steady, and don't back down when you know you're right. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply not giving in. And making sure your flag flies a little higher because of it. Enjoyed the story? Tap subscribe so you don't miss the next HOA meltdown. We've got plenty more where that came from. At its core, this story is more than just a battle with a power-hungry HOA president. It's a lesson in knowing your rights and standing firm in the face of pressure. In today's world, too many people give in to loud voices, false authority, or the fear of confrontation. But as this story shows, you don't need to shout to be strong. Sometimes, the most powerful response is patience, documentation, and the quiet confidence of someone who knows they're on the right side of the law. This tale reminds us that freedom, true personal freedom, begins with understanding where your boundaries lie, both literally and legally. It also teaches that bullies often back down when you refuse to play their game. For anyone who's ever felt overpowered by a board, a neighbor, or a system, this story proves one thing: you don't have to be loud to be heard. You just have to stand your ground, and let the truth speak louder than the noise.